In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Christ is among us. Beloved faithful, last Sunday we started to talk a bit again about the spiritual illnesses, and more specifically about the illness of anger. But last Sunday it was more like an introduction again to our spiritual illnesses, and we talked mostly about the distinction between the illness and the person who is ill, and how we are called to look within us if we want to be healed, and to have compassion for the person who is suffering from a spiritual illness. Of course, to hate the illness and to fight against illness and against evil in the world, but to love the people who are fooled by the devil to do evil in the world. Hate the illness, love the sufferer. Today we'll continue our discussion about the spiritual illness of anger, and we'll try to see the different forms that this illness takes within us. Because generally speaking, when we think of anger, and when we want to be healed of anger, we think of those moments when we lose our temper and we become angry. That is one aspect of the spiritual illness of anger. That is the moment or the times when the anger within us, the invisible anger within us, becomes visible on the outside. It becomes obvious that we are struggling with this spiritual illness. But the Holy Fathers of the Church, these masters of spirituality who know, because they struggle themselves with the spiritual illnesses and who know the cures of the spiritual illnesses, tell us that anger has also an internalized aspect. Anger is not only, as I said, when we lose our temper. Anger is also when we have resentment within us, which is a sustained anger continuing in a more interiorized and hidden form and founded on the remembrance of some suffered offense, humiliation, or injustice. He did this to me, and I cannot get over it. That's resentment. That's, that tension, that anger within us. Also, the Holy Fathers identify rancor or bitterness, also hatred, and all forms of grudges, hostility, animosity, and enmity. In short, all forms of wickedness within us as being part of this spiritual illness of anger. Even if we keep it under control and it doesn't blow in our face, it is there. And when we are under pressure or under stress, it might blow in our face because we are not healed within. Additionally, indignation, mockery, scoffing, and irony with regard to people and feelings of ill will, like rejoicing in some misfortune or disappointment affecting one's neighbor, are also linked to the spiritual illness of anger. Once again, indignation, mockery, scoffing, irony with regard to people, and feelings of ill will when we rejoice when our neighbor suffers a loss or a misfortune. That is part of the spiritual illness of anger. Of course, anger, besides having this internalized aspect, takes also violent and exteriorized forms, And some extreme forms of this exteriorized anger are various rivalries, battles, acts of aggression, fights, and even crimes or worse. What are the causes of anger within us? Why do we have this internal and sometimes external anger? What's causing all of these different forms of anger within us? The Holy Fathers say that love of pleasure is the fundamental cause of anger. Love of pleasure. Jean-Claude Larcher, and I have most of this information from a wonderful book written by an Orthodox theologian who lives in France. His name is Jean-Claude Larcher, and he wrote a wonderful book in 3 volumes about the therapy of spiritual illnesses. And he says that anger is born in man not only when he is saddened at not being able to obtain the pleasure he seeks, but also and principally when he feels, fears, or finds himself deprived of a pleasure in which he once delighted, and when love of self finds itself thus murdered by suffering, as St. Maximus the Confessor says. What's this about? We enjoyed a pleasure, okay, for a while. And then for some reason, that pleasure is taken away from us. And we are still like little children who played with a toy. They received the toy from the parents, from the mother or the father. And when the father or the mother says, now it's time to put the toy away, the child becomes angry. No, I still want to play with that toy. We are still the same as adults. After indulging in a pleasure, when that pleasure is taken away from us, we become angry. The desire for sensible goods. So anger then turns against the person who is or seems to be the cause of this frustration, or who at least threatens to be or appears to be so. Who is the child angry towards? Towards the mother who gave the child the toy in the first place, but now if the mother says, no, now you have to put the toy away, the child is angry against the mother. In the same way, in our case, when somebody seems to be, or sometimes it really is the cause of ending our pleasure, we are angry towards that person. The desire for sensible goods and the attachment to them are also fundamental causes of anger. With so many advertisements that are designed by psychologists who know our desires, these advertisements are designed to stir up our desires, and with more and more people affording less and less, no wonder there is so much anger in our society. So, the words of St. James in his letter, in chapter 4, verse 1, are so true. Where do wars and fights come from among you? Do they not come from your desires for pleasures that were in your members? Or St. Maximus the Confessor, who says, because we are taken by love of material things and the attraction of pleasure, and because we prefer all this to the commandment of love, we are unable to love those who hate us. Rather, it happens that we oppose those who love us because of these very things. Which are these sensible goods that we get attached to and we become angry if we lose them, especially as adults? Which are these sensible goods? The first one, identified by the Holy Fathers, is attachment to food. Now, everybody knows that, when we are hungry, we have the tendency to become angry, right? is not only about that, it is also about, indulging in food for a while, and then maybe, a time comes that we don't have the same amount of food or the same quality of food. It happens, that we lose our job, let's say, and then now we live only on, on support from the government, and we cannot have steak every day. And we have to have, mac and cheese. And we become bitter because we don't have steak every day. Attachment to food, or attachment to substances, attachment to the pleasure of eating a lot or good quality, pleasant quality foods. Attachment, this is, of course, the spiritual illness that we talked about before, gluttony. Another one is attachment to money, riches, and material goods. Yes, we really become angry when we lose one of our toys. When for some reason somebody takes away from us something that we enjoyed, a car or the big house that we used to have, and now we have to move in a smaller one because we cannot afford, to pay the big mortgage for the big house, and now we become bitter and angry. Attachment to material goods. This is the spiritual illness of love of money and greed. And we also get attached to sensual pleasure, to lust, and when we don't have it anymore, we become angry. But the worst one that the Holy Fathers identified as a cause of provoking anger within us is getting attached to myself. Getting attached to my status, which is the spiritual illness of vainglory and pride. Vainglory and pride are the most fundamental cause of anger. St. Mark the Ascetic writes, "This sickness affects those who pursue the first place among honors." And guess what happens when they lose it? It is a well-known fact that many celebrities lose their ways when they lose their fame. If they are not number one, or at least in top 10 anymore, they lose themselves. And it happens the same in our lives. When we lose whatever status we had, we become angry and bitter. Also, we become angry when other people tell us things that we don't like. Why? Because of our vainglory and pride. How could you dare tell me something like that? St. Basil the Great says that it is not words that hurt us. It is not the words of the other people that hurt us, but rather our pride, which rebels against us and the high opinion we have of ourselves. It is attachment to these sensible goods, and also attachment to our vainglory and pride, to the image that we build about ourselves, that really hurts us and makes us to be angry. God willing, next time we will finish our discussion about identifying this spiritual illness within us, and we will see how anger affects our souls, our minds, and our bodies. The health of our soul, our mind, and our body. Glory to the Father, and to the Son,